Thanks for joining us on Parliament. This is Bloomberg Quint. I'm Harsha Subramaniam.
I'm Meera Dugal. Let's get you the headlines. Nifty and Sensex trade near the day's highs. Heavyweights like HDFC Bank and Infosys lead the gains.
IL&FS entities cannot be classified as non-performing assets without the approval of the NCLAT.
State Bank of India denies that it is planning to take Jet Airways to NCLT after a PTI report over the weekend.
The GST Council cuts tax on under-construction projects from 12% to 5%, also cuts rates on affordable housing.
All right, all of that coming up, but let's start with the markets. Darshan is here with us.
Yeah, so it's really surprising that when China's up almost 5% in trade, most of the Asian markets are up. We are absolutely flat in trade, so there's not enough traction that's happening. The VIX has managed to move up, but surprisingly, real estate index was up almost 2.5% on open, and that has actually cooled off significantly in trade. So most of the indices are trading range bound. PSU banking index is the only one that's probably trading with slight losses, but apart from it, there's nothing much happening as far as the markets are concerned. Few stocks that I want to highlight. First of all, it has to be Motherson Sumi, which is up almost 11 or over 10% in trade. No news coming in, but probably the only thing that comes close is Trump's tweets on China's and how trade war will probably be deferred. So that's the only explanation that's there on Motherson Sumi. Kajaria Ceramics is doing well in trade, given the fact that GST on real estate come off. No, the real estate counters aren't doing, but the real estate ancillary companies like Kajaria or some of the tile companies have managed to do well. Sugar stocks are doing well as a theme that is doing well. And Adani Power Ports is down almost 8% in trade, given the fact that they've acquired an asset from Adani Enterprises. Not that it was a bad deal, but it was that, shareholder approval was bypassed, and that's something that the markets does not like. And a lot of these high beta names like the ADAG Group and the Suzlons and all these companies which reacted massively on Friday, they are in correction mode today.
Darshan, thank you for that. That's the markets view. The National Company Law Appellate Tribunal has ruled that IL&FS entities cannot be declared as NPAs without its approval. Remember, the tribunal had earlier announced certain IL&FS group firms a moratorium from servicing their debt. But despite failing their debt obligations, these firms cannot be classified as bad assets. Arpan Chaturvedi, who was in court when the judgment was pronounced, joins us now with more details on this one. Arpan.
Well, the NCLAT has made it clear today that IL&FS and its group companies, they will not they will not be classified as NPAs. This order came in today's hearing. It was a short hearing. There were no arguments. It was listed for orders on an application moved by certain lenders, and in that the bench headed by NCLAT chairperson S.J. Mukhopadhyay passed these orders. There's also a moratorium order which is in application in this particular case. In the last hearing, we saw the government had submitted an affidavit where they had classified the IL&FS and its subsidiaries under three groups based on their ability to service debt obligations. After that, we also saw that certain companies, based on their ability to service their debt obligations, moratorium was lifted on them. And today, in today's hearing, this was specifically on the applications related to the classification of NPAs, and the NCLAT has said that for now, neither IL&FS or any of the group companies will be classified as NPAs.
All right, Abhisar Divanji, partner and national leader of financial services at EY, now joins us on the phone line. Abhisar, thanks for taking our call. Abhisar, we had a situation where there was a full moratorium. Then the NCLT said that some companies which are completely in a position to pay, they can start paying. And now the NCLT has come in and said that none of the companies, irrespective of their payment capacity, will be tagged as an NPA.
Right.
What do you make of that, Abhisar?
One is that, frankly, it's the RBI which should decide what's NPA and what's not NPA based on its norms. Unfortunately, we are where we are. But I personally think that companies which do not have the ability to pay, and I'm sure it's already been dissected by now which companies do and which don't. The companies which do not have the ability to pay, which is the red and slightly some of the amber ones, that ought not to be granted a moratorium. Because any which way, assuming these companies were to be taken to NCLT, there would have been a 50% provisioning come up immediately. Unfortunately, because IL&FS as a group has decided not to go to NCLT, and IL&FS itself anyway cannot be taken to NCLT, what really happened is that it's outside the norms of any provisioning, but those companies are inherently bad. So if those companies are inherently bad, I think they deserve a provisioning requirement. However, if there is a thinking that some of these will actually recoup with interest everything, and an analysis has been supportive of that, then those companies could be granted a moratorium because this is part of an overall restructuring plan.
Sure. The tribunal says that this order has been passed with the interest of, because, the debt resolution process is taking place. My question, Abhisar, is whose interest is being protected?
I think what the lenders have represented is because they are not in any position, given the moratorium was granted, they are not in any position to recover their money. They said that there should be a exemption from provisioning NPL norms because they were helpless in their hands because of this restructuring plan. However, what merits some consideration is the fact that if an initial analysis is done, which proves that there were events of default, then those events of default should be reflected on the bank's balance sheets. So at the end of the day, whose interest is protecting? I think the larger interest is that one should have an orderly resolution to IL&FS, which is a very well-intended thing. But at the same time, using that to defer provisionings is not the best.
Abhisar, how will banks now look at these accounts? So I think in Q3, some of the accounts had been classified and some banks had classified them as NPAs. Others, actually a large part was due to be classified in Q4. So now what? All IL&FS accounts will be standard accounts?
So I think there will have to be an RBI intervention to this. Because while the courts have said these need not be declared as NPAs, I mean, declaration of NPA is a regulatory consideration of the RBI. And frankly, and of course, to a great extent, it is also judgmental. So a court order dictating something not to be an NPA, I think will warrant some kind of a consultation with the RBI, which I hope will happen. Or the RBI will have to come up with its own point of view. But yes, at the end of the day, one has to comply with the court condition, which is a requirement. They will not make the provisions.
Abhisar, a counterpoint was put to me by someone saying that if there is a moratorium on payments, although now that moratorium is not complete after the last NCLAT order, but if there is a moratorium, then it only makes logical sense to have a standstill on the classification as well. Is there any merit to that argument, Abhisar?
To some extent, yes. As I said earlier, there is merit if one does not have access to recovery means, then it would be unfair for banks to classify some things as NPA. I take that point, but at the same time, I also take the point that because an initial analysis has been done and the banks are aware of ability of respective companies and IL&FS as a whole to pay or not to pay, then on their own assessments, if there have been defaults and those companies do not have the cash to pay for them, then there have to be provisions. But if those companies have cashes which have been kept in escrow and because of a moratorium the cash has not been distributed, then there is some merit to say that there should not be provisioning issues. So it's the sheer lack of inability to get cash out which is already available. Those would merit a moratorium on provisioning.
Okay.
But not otherwise.
Abhisar, sort of speculative question, but even if now the court has said that these will not be tagged as NPA, nothing prevents the RBI from saying that, okay, I want you to put aside 50% or whatever the NCLT provisioning requirement was, that put aside X percent as provisioning against these accounts. They would be perfectly justified in doing that, right?
The courts higher than any regulatory authority in India. So at the end of the day, I think the courts will prevail. But RBI in prudence would want banks to set aside capital. That may not necessarily be in the form of provisioning, but at least in terms of some risk weightage issues.
Just another angle to this, fund managers on the other hand have marked down their exposure to IL&FS debt. I mean, how does this sit? On one hand, one bunch of investors have actually taken the hit, while on the other hand, the court is now saying that banks will not take the hit at this juncture.
So I agree. So as I said earlier, if inherently the companies require a markdown, they should be done irrespective of any order, because then that reflects the right number. The only exception to this is cases where there is cash flow, but because of moratorium, the cash flow cannot be pulled out.
All right, Abhisar, I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for giving us that quick take. We'll see how banks actually now treat these accounts and whether the RBI intervenes in any fashion.
Let's move on now. State Bank of India, meanwhile, has put out a statement rebutting a PTI report which claims that the lender is planning to take Jet Airways to the NCLT. The statement was issued just a short while ago, comes on the back of shareholders' approval for the debt recast plan. Anurag Kotaki of Bloomberg News now joins us with more details on this one. Anurag, what do we know?
Hi. The Press Trust of India put out a report saying State Bank of India, which is the lead lender to Jet Airways, is considering taking the company to NCLT. As you mentioned now, SBI has just said that there is no final decision on that yet, and at this moment it's all totally speculative. But what's interesting is that SBI is the lead lender, and they have proposed a resolution plan to Jet Airways, which includes conversion of some debt into equity. And the shareholders have already given them approval for a structure like that, although we don't know the specifics yet. Press Trust of India said that Etihad abstained from voting in the shareholder meeting where they took these decisions. So we'll have to see where things stand, but this is an interesting development and we'll keep an eye on it.
Anurag, thanks so much for that. The Indian debt market has been hit by a series of corporate defaults over the last few years, be it large accounts referred for insolvency by the RBI in 2017 or more recent ones like the IL&FS group. But did credit rating agencies give adequate warning to investors? Advait Rao Palipu continues his deep dive into rating agencies and is joining us with his findings. Advait.
So in 2017, the RBI had notified about 40 companies, large NPA accounts, to go to the IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Court proceedings. Of these 40 companies, we were able to find ratings for 35 of them. 5 of them are unlisted, therefore there are no credit ratings available. So these 35 companies fall into 2 categories. 23 companies had been rated as a default. Their instruments were rated as default by the credit rating agencies, majority in 2015 and then later. The remaining 12 companies had outstanding ratings that we could find, and they weren't classified as default. These ratings were above the default grade, which is D, and most of the rating agencies haven't either reviewed it again or they've suspended or withdrawn those ratings since then.
So what were the the ones which had been downgraded? Were they downgraded in a timely fashion?
So what we find is that there were multiple notch downgrades. So the idea of a credit rating is that as soon as the riskiness of the bond or the debt paper is increasing, then the rating agency has to take give a rating by 1 grade each time. So keep reducing the grades each time. But what we find is in a lot of these cases, the bond ratings were BBB or above, and then suddenly within overnight almost it was re-rated to a default rating. So the multiple notch downgrades essentially don't give investors a good idea of how the risk is building over these instruments over time.
Okay, and also if 2017 is when they were referred to the insolvency courts, the rating downgrade should perhaps have come as early as 2015. Again, that didn't happen in many cases.
Yeah. So we only found 10 cases where the defaults or the ratings were given in 2015 while the rest were given after that. So it's a question of when the banks informed the rating agencies and when the rating agencies took action on those, on their previous published ratings for these companies.
All right, Advait, thanks for that.
Let's move on. Goods and services tax, the GST Council, that is, has provided some relief to home buyers. The council has slashed the tax rate on under construction residential properties to 5% on the earlier rate of 12%. On affordable housing projects, it's been brought down to 1%. Nikunj Johri has the details.
GST Council has approved lowering of GST rate for the real estate sector, a move which is intended to give boost for the real estate sector by increasing sales. The GST Council has lowered GST on under construction properties to 5% from 12%, and for affordable housing projects, GST has been reduced from 8% to 1%. The benefit of input tax credit that could be availed by developers earlier will no longer be available to developers. The GST Council has also widened the definition of affordable housing projects. A flat or a house with 60 square meter of carpet area in a metro city and 90 square meter carpet area in a non-metro city with a price cap of 45 lakh rupees will come under an affordable housing project. Both these conditions of carpet area and the price will have to be met for a project to be classified as an affordable housing project. The rate changes will be effective from April 1, 2019, and the rate changes are revenue neutral, implying that the government will not incur any revenue loss due to these tax changes.
Let's also listen into what some of the state finance ministers had to say after the meeting.
For affordable housing, 1% for non-affordable housing, 5% both without ITC, and a capping of 45 lakh. And for the metro, 60 square meter, and for non-metro, 90 square meter, and a capping of 45 lakhs.
Government of India's own research shows that the tax incidence across states averages to 0.76%. So my justification was very solid, and I'm happy that the Honorable Union Finance Minister and the GST Council have accepted my submission for the sake of affordable housing.
Regarding the real estate sector, there are many procedural issues involved, very complicated. And therefore it was decided the officials will continue to work on it, but things are procedural only, therefore they would be determined by a video conference.
When will this be?
April 1st will come into effect.
Okay. April 1st, another VC meeting is what you're saying?
Before that, by March 10th, another video conference will take place.
Yeah.
And by 15th, we will be able to issue the notice.
This decision is going to be win-win for both the flat buyers as well as the real estate sector. The flat buyers will also benefit because in the existing scheme of 12% and 8% with ITC, there were we were receiving the complaints saying that the developers were not passing the benefit of the input tax credit by reducing their price to the consumers. Now what has happened is that this scheme ensures that 5% and 1% has already taken care of the input tax credit, right? And therefore that benefit gets automatically passed on to the consumers.
All right. The council decision provides a big boost, undoubtedly, to the real estate sector. Sangeeta Prasad, the Managing Director of Mahindra Lifespace, and Pankaj Kapoor of Liasis for us share the optimism.
It does change the mind of the buyer because it has been in the making for a while, because there's a distinct 7% cut in both segments of the market, and the buyer, it's also a message to the market as well as to the whole community that yes, the intent of the government is to boost buying and selling of homes, which has been muted in the past.
Interesting. Well, yeah, I'm glad you made that point, because the budget too showed some signs of the government taking cognizance of the state that the real estate sector by and large was in. So let's talk about which of the two segments do you reckon benefits more, because I think both affordable and non-affordable have seen these cuts. Typically, the affordable one is where the price sensitivity, to my mind, would be higher. But what are your thoughts?
So first of all, I wouldn't categorize the market as affordable and non-affordable.
Okay.
Anything which is affordable to the right segment is what we should look at. So first of all, the affordable has now just become 1%. So if you can understand, it is merely it is a nominal tax, and that is a great indication to the market that the government wants people at that segment to buy homes, and there is virtually no arbitrage between under construction and fully finished goods, because 1% is indeed a nominal charge. In fact, even in the homes for middle class buyers, it has reduced to 5%. It will reduce to 5%. That means again a 7% cut, which will inspire people who have been waiting to buy homes to buy homes. That's the whole idea and intent, and we'll see how it pans out as we step into the next few days and months.
Last time that you were here, you were saying that the inventory buildup is so stark that it requires some mammoth efforts for it to be cleared. Do you sense that this plus what's happened in the budget could lead to that?
Yeah, I'm seeing it's a good time for the end users coming, because A, the government's reduced the tax, but builders willing to sell, they are laden with the debts. We did assessments. The builders need to increase the sales by 2.5 times to stay afloat. Because the debt itself is too high. So in a sense, like the decision taken is in the right directions to boost the sales. Apart from that, it's going to really solve the cost crisis quite a lot. In making the project ready, that means the customer advances reduces. For a project's prudent economic viability, you have 60 to 65% of the money to be taken care by the customer advances. Right now it has reduced below 30%, and that's a basic reason the builder have to go and borrow the money and to make the projects ready. That means it increases their finance burden. By reducing this, by boosting the sales, it is going to really bring back the economic order in which the real estate can start really behaving and performing well.
PC Mohanan is one of the two senior government statisticians who resigned earlier this year. His grouse was that what he calls government interference undermining the integrity of India's statistics apparatus. Anirban Nag of Bloomberg News, who spoke to us, joins us now. Spoke to Mohanan, joins us now. Anirban, thanks for joining us. What was the conversation like?
Well, we asked him why he resigned, and that's exactly the reason. What he says is that this is probably for the first time that this kind of interference is happening. He was giving an example of how post the 1990s, when the NSSO covered a very nice survey on poverty levels, and even though it was adverse, the government went ahead and the NSO and the Commission went ahead and published those things. He said that that's not happening of late. Niti Aayog is kind of meddling into these numbers which the NSSO is producing, both just not on the GDP side, but also on the labor report, which we all know is not being published because there are some adversarial comments there. So
it wasn't just about one report, his issues were much larger?
Yeah, also going back to the GDP numbers, he says that the problem is with not with the GDP numbers, but the kind of revisions that are taking place. That throws off not just investors, but also the government, because there are lots of things that are attached to those GDP numbers. It throws everything awry.
Thank you so much for joining us with those details. US President Donald Trump will hold off raising tariff on Chinese imports after what he called very productive trade talks. Tariffs were supposed to have been hiked from 10 to 25% from next Saturday, but both sides have decided to work on a more comprehensive agreement. Tom McKenzie reports.
This isn't, of course, a major surprise, given what we heard from President Trump just in the last week or so in terms of the optimism from him in terms of these negotiations. But, of course, it is a major step potentially towards a deal now. You've had this tariff deadline, March the 1st, lifted or extended by the US. That would have increased, by the way, those tariffs from 10 to 25% on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. And as you say, President Trump suggesting that now we're looking at a meeting between the two leaders at some point. We've heard from others in the administration at some point, potentially by the middle or end of March at Mar-a-Lago. So certainly more optimism. It's interesting that contrast with some of the more nuanced comments that we got out of USTR Lighthizer over the weekend, who said that there were still major hurdles between the two sides. And of course, our reporting suggesting that one of those hurdles was a disagreement around the enforcement of any deal on the yuan. Of course, the US have been pushing the Chinese to say that they will keep the yuan stable because the US are concerned that should they devalue it, it would mitigate the impact of tariffs. And apparently the enforcement mechanism, there are still details that need to be ironed out from that, and that has remained an area that the two sides need to close the gap on. But in other fronts, Trump saying that they've made progress on things like intellectual property, enforced tech transfer, services, agriculture as well. So clearly the president sees that there has been enough progress to extend this deadline.
Tom McKenzie reporting from Beijing. Out of time on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Lots more coming up.